This is the zombie drama that I didn't finish watching during college, and the guys who have seen it should be in line with life. The main character Rick is the most charming man, step by step, from a righteous police officer morphing into a post-apocalyptic god of killing. Without further ado, the story begins. Rick and Shane are county police officers. The two of them are on duty, chatting as usual. The radio goes off. Headquarters is chasing a group of robbers and needs Rick to intercept them on the road. The two listen to the action immediately, and a few minutes later, they arrived at the interception site. Rick laid the spikes on the ground, then parked the car on the side of the road and waited for the robber's vehicle to arrive. After a while, a private car is being chased by police cars. It is the group of fleeing robbers. They ran over the spikes without incident. The tire scrapping made the car drift more than 10 meters, and eventually overturned and rolled to the side of the road. Now they don't know what happened to the robbers inside. Rick took the lead and approached the car carefully. One of the robbers climbed out of the driver's side and shot at the police at the first opportunity. A fierce gun battle broke out between the two sides. Rick was also hit in the chest. The police also shot this robber. Another robber just came out and fought to the death but was soon killed. Shane ran up to check on Rick's condition first. Luckily, he got up and said he was fine. The bulletproof vest he wore this morning saved his life. They didn't notice that someone else was in the car, just as Rick was telling Shane not to tell his wife about the incident. The shot hit the vest's blind spot. Shane panicked and ripped open his shirt to stop the bleeding. He shouted at his colleagues to call an ambulance, and this was his best friend. After resuscitation, Rick is out of life-threatening but has been in a coma in a deep sleep, and he can vaguely see Shane every day with flowers to see him. I don't know how long it took, but Rick finally woke up. In his memory, Shane seemed to be here just now, but he soon saw the vase next to it. The flowers inside had long since withered, and it looked like no one had been here for a long time. He struggled to get up to check but fell straight to the floor, perhaps because he had been lying in bed too long. He pulled out the syringe and called out to the nurse to come and help him, but no one responded. After a while, he slowly adjusted and opened the door to the room. Rick rushed to the faucet and took a big gulp of tap water. Then he went to the hospital corridor, and he was stunned. The place had become very dilapidated. He wanted to find out what had happened, but it was awfully quiet. No one was there. Rick walked towards the nurse's station, and the first thing he tried to do was dial the phone but had lost the signal. When he came to another aisle, he looked in disbelief at the aisle inside, and there was a corpse lying on the floor that had been chewed up by something. Rick hurriedly turned around to the other side to check. The situation here was even worse. There were bullet holes and blood all over the walls, and even traces of explosions. Rick thought it was just a prank, but the door moved. Some hissing sounds came from inside, and palms were sticking out from inside. Look at his nails are not normal people should have. Rick was devastated. Who could tell him what was going on here? The elevator had lost power, so he had to take the stairs to get out of this creepy place. The stairwell was filled with the smell of dust. Luckily, he had just taken a box of matches from the nurse's station, and after a few minutes, he finally opened the door to the first floor. The bright light made him uncomfortable, but he slowly walked out. Looking at the open space, there were white bags piled up, but all of them were corpses, and there densely were hundreds of them. Rick did not want to stay. They only wanted to leave this ghost place. Due to the weakness of his body, he could only use his hands and feet, but he was stunned by the sight before him. It looks like an army was stationed here, but now it's also devastated. There were too many strange things, and Rick was numb. He just wanted to hurry home and reunite with his wife. On the way, he would have liked to ride a bike, but a half-dozen bodies crawled toward him. This is not scientific logic. He soon returned home and called out his wife's name, but no one answered him, and even his son Carl was nowhere to be found. Rick has been checking all the rooms with no luck. Rick was a little broken. His wife and son were everything to him. Looking at the outside world, perhaps they have met with misfortune. Thinking about this, Rick cried out in pain and then smacked himself hard. If this is a dream, wake up! But this is the reality. Rick sat in front of his house in a state of despair. That's when he finally saw someone alive on the street. The bright light blurred his vision, and a figure appeared behind him. A shovel slapped him unconscious. It was a boy who shouted for his father to hurry over. Rick looked towards the distance, and an adult figure soon appeared on the street and finished the man just now with one shot. Then he quickly came to Rick's face. Seeing that his son was okay, he asked Rick why he was bandaged up. Rick was a little confused. This man kept asking him what kind of injury he had received. Before Rick could answer, He passed out from exhaustion. When he woke up again, he was already lying in bed. The boy was standing next to him with a weapon. His hand was secured to the bed. The man had changed his bandages. He started to ask Rick what kind of wound he had. Rick reluctantly said it was a gunshot wound. The man touched his forehead again. He then untied the rope. Then Rick came into the living room with a blanket on, just about to pull open the window to get some air. The man told him not to do so, or they would be attracted to the light in the house. Now it's all over the street outside. Rick didn't understand what he was talking about. He just saw this man shoot a man during the day. The man says it looks like you need to wear glasses. That's a zombie. The three of them then start eating, and it's only during the conversation that they learn that Rick is in a coma after suffering a gunshot wound. He had no idea what was going on, and he just saw bodies everywhere. The man then realized that no wonder Rick acted as if he knew nothing and then explained to him what was going on outside. A month ago, the virus broke out. All the dead people will turn into zombies and attack when they see people. No matter where you are, you have to keep quiet. One of the most important things is not to be bitten. The man saw Rick in bandages during the day. That's why they were so nervous. After being bitten, they would get a fever and become one of the zombies. In the second half of the night, the three started to rest in the living room. They got to know each other. The man's name was Morgan. The friends are all too familiar with him, and this is Morgan's earliest appearance. His son is also still with him. He heard that Rick was a police officer and immediately stood in awe. At this time, there was a car alarm outside. Morgan explained that it was probably a zombie accidentally hitting the car, which had happened before. Then they turned off the lights and went to the window to check. Rick was also curious to look outside. Morgan said the zombies were real. At the moment, there are dozens of zombies roaming around outside. The little boy looked outside and saw a familiar figure, and he got a little excited. This is his mother. Then, he flung himself under the covers and sobbed quietly. Morgan can only comfort him by not crying out loud. Rick is still observing these zombies. This incident has overturned his perception. The next day, Morgan and his son took Rick out. He taught Rick how to deal with zombies. The first point is not to treat them as human beings. The second point must be to attack the head. The third point is to use cold weapons as much as possible to avoid attracting more zombies. They just walked out, and the zombies at the door approached them. Rick used a baseball bat towards his head. A series of 7 or 8 smashes, which solved the zombie. This is also Rick's first kill since the end of the world. Then Rick came home again. After a calm analysis, he thought his wife and son should still be alive. At least they were fine when they left here because the drawers in the house were empty. Even the photos and such things were gone, which rekindled his fighting spirit. And he vowed to find them. Morgan then said they were probably headed to Atlanta because the radio had said there was a shelter there. So maybe they were on their way there, with a target in mind. Rick stopped dawdling, grabbed a set of keys, and took Morgan to the police station where he worked. There was a backup electrical system so that they could take a nice shower there. This is also an enjoyment in the post-apocalyptic world. Rick also changed back into a police uniform. They went to the armory and took away all the weapons they could use. Half an hour later, they walked out of the police station. Rick tried to get Morgan to come with him to Atlanta, but he refused. He didn't want to leave town, maybe because of his wife. He also wanted his son to learn how to shoot before he thought about going anywhere else. Rick also stopped trying to persuade him. Everyone has their reasons. Rick then gave him a walkie-talkie. Keep in touch if they go to Atlanta in the future. Thus, the 2 generations of chiefs are separated here. If you like this series, please remember to subscribe to my channel. I will keep updating with the movie. The post-apocalyptic zombie virus suddenly breaks out, turning 90% of the US population into zombies. Rick drives towards Atlanta, hoping to find his wife and son there. On the way, he kept calling survivors on the radio. Although there was no response, his voice had been heard by a team of survivors, but because of the signal problem, the team could not reply. As fate would have it, Rick's wife, son, and good friend Shane were here. It was Shane who protected them along the way. In Lori's mind, Rick had died in the hospital, so she also accepted Shane's advances. They didn't think Rick would miraculously survive. The car ran out of gas after a while, so Rick had to walk to see if he could find any. He came to a house on the outskirts of town and tried to get help from the owner, but the door was locked. Rick knocked on the door and got no answer. He went to the bedroom window and found the owner dead inside. This look should be suicide with a gun. This scene made Rick feel a little down. He did not choose to go inside, not wanting to disturb the deceased. Then he found the owner's car, but no key was inside. But luckily, Rick found the horse in the backyard. This is also a good means of transportation in the post-apocalyptic world. He just rode on towards Atlanta. He didn't know how long it took, but he finally arrived in Atlanta. It was also empty. The streets were unusually quiet. Only when he reached the city center did a few zombies appear sporadically. It does look like there are signs of an army garrison here, and it was obviously taken over by zombies at the end. When he didn't know where to go, there was the sound of a helicopter in the sky. He saw the reflection of the plane on the glass of the building, and Rick hurriedly rode his horse and accelerated in that direction to catch up. He rode his horse and ran while watching the plane's movement, unaware of the situation ahead. The zombies in front of him made his scalp numb. A whole street of zombies, even the horses, began to be frightened. He could only hurry to turn around and return the way he came. The zombies behind him were like a tidal wave toward him. But soon, Rick found many zombies gathered in front of him. The zombies around him had already jumped in front of him in just a few seconds. High-headed horse directly by the zombie pounced on the ground, because most of the zombies swooped up to gnaw on the horse's flesh, giving him a chance to catch his breath. He hurriedly kicked away a zombie and crawled in the other direction, but when he looked up, the way ahead was already blocked. Rick had no choice but to crawl toward the bottom of the tank. His heart was in his throat, gasping for air, but he didn't expect the zombies at the front of the tank to be looking at him too. Now there was no way to escape. Rick hurriedly pulled out a pistol to solve the nearest zombie. The pistol only has 6 rounds of ammunition, a series of 5 zombies killed. Rick only stopped the last bullet he was going to save for himself as the zombies kept coming, but Rick looked up and saw that the lid on the bottom of the tank had opened. Luckily Rick escaped a disaster. He just took the pistol off the corpse next to him, and the corpse woke up. Panicked, Rick immediately fired. A feeling of dizziness came over him, and after a while, Rick finally recovered. He poked his head out of the top of the tank and saw his weapon wrapped in the zombie swarm. He was thinking of getting his guns and ammunition to break out, but now it was impossible to do so. Soon a few zombies climbed right up to the tank, and Rick had to go back inside again. The zombies surrounded him. As he was thinking about how to get out, the radio inside the tank came on. Rick realizes that maybe the people outside have a way for him to get out. He immediately picked up the walkie-talkie and started talking back, asking the man to help him, but Rick's situation is really not good. The man then says there are not that many zombies on the street to the right of the tank, so run over there before they react. He will be there to meet Rick. Rick listened and found bullets and a grenade on the dead soldier. Rick opens the lid of the tank. He then jumps out of the tank and shoots the zombies in front of him as he goes, but the gunfire also quickly attracts more zombies to come. At this point, the man appears and runs into an alley with him. The man and Rick climbed up the ladder, and the good thing is that the two had a scare climbing to the second floor. They breathed heavily. This experience was enough for once. The two men began to introduce themselves. The man's name was Glenn. They went through the stairs to the roof of another house and then back to the first floor through the patio. Glenn took out his walkie-talkie and contacted his companion for a pickup. When they arrived at the first floor, 2 zombies were in front of them. Just then, 2 heavily armed men rushed out from inside the door to directly solve the zombie. Rick and Glenn quickly ran toward the house. A woman then held a gun to Rick's head, accusing Rick actions will of getting everyone killed. Rick doesn't understand what's going on. They didn't explain and pushed Rick toward the front. Several people arrived at the door, and Rick froze. It turns out that his actions inside the city let the zombies go berserk, resulting in a somewhat problematic situation for the squad. Even zombies will use rocks as tools. Breaking glass here is only a matter of time. Rick explained that he was like this because he saw the helicopter, but the others didn't believe what he said. Just then, gunshots rang out from the roof. Shooting now will only attract the zombies' attention. They rushed toward the roof of the building. When they arrived at the top of the building, the man immediately cursed and told Dixon to stop. But Dixon was not impressed and laughed at their cowardice. T-Dog went up to Dixon and argued that such behavior would get everyone killed. But Dixon was a ruthless character who did what he wanted to do. Rick tried to stop him but was knocked down with a punch. Dixon continued to beat up T-Dog. Dixon even pulled out a pistol and tried to shoot him, which is a madman. At this point, Dixon raised his hand to vote that he should be the team leader. Several people were afraid of the weapons in his hands, so they had to raise their hands and agree. Seeing such a result, he was very satisfied. At that moment, Rick knocked him down with the butt of his gun and then leaned his right hand against the hose. Rick patiently persuaded him that he should unite to survive, but Dixon had a face of disdain. Rick was also no longer polite. With a gun directly against his head, as if sensing Rick's killing intent, Dixon fell silent. The most important thing now is to get out of the city. Glenn went to the sewer to check the situation, but steel bars firmly welded shut the exit. Now the time was running out because the zombies had broken through the first glass door, and the group had to return to the roof again. After some observation, they decided to find a way to drive the van to take everyone out of there. How to get to the van became a problem. After some thought, Rick thinks that zombies are attracted to smells and sounds, and if they apply zombie flesh and blood to their bodies, they should be able to cover up the smell. They then put on their gloves and changed their clothes. They opened the back door and dragged the previous corpse in. The next step was to disembowel the zombie. Rick took the axe from the fire hydrant and approached the body. Several people looked at each other, thinking that this was incredible. Rick took the axe and smashed it down. Several people felt nauseous and did not dare to look at this image. Then they painted their bodies with zombie blood. Glenn felt it was worse than being chased by zombies. Rick was ready to go to the car with Glenn and threw the keys to the handcuffs to them before leaving. Then the two came to the road. This is an experiment, and there is a good chance that this will get them killed. But the zombies didn't find them. They crawled from under the car to the street and went straight to the van's location. Their companions then also darted to the top of the building to observe their movements. Dixon also asks T-Dog if Rick took the handcuff keys with him. T-Dog then pulls out the keys, and Dixon drops his mind. But at this time, the sky is cloudy. At this point, the survivor camp receives a signal from T-Dog's walkie-talkie, but the signal is still not very good. Glenn and Rick have been getting closer to the truck, but the accident still came when the sky rained. Remember to subscribe to my channel. I will keep updating. During the end times, several survivors were trapped on the roof of the building. Below are the countless zombies. Now the only way to get through the zombies is to drive to the van in the distance. Rick and Glenn decide to cover themselves in zombie blood and try to see if they can hide from their senses. Armed with weapons, they walked towards the outside of the building, mimicking the footsteps of zombies. As they approached the zombies, they were taken for their kind. Glenn was relieved that this had worked. The two prepare to get past the vehicle and head into the street. The number of zombies out there was too much. They dare not be careless. They can only move forward a little. But at this time, the sky began to thunder. On the other side of the city, outside the camp, the girl Amy said it was getting late and they should return. Originally Glenn and the others also went out from here to look for supplies. I must mention that Rick's wife, Lori, is watching the scene of Shane and Carl getting along, and she feels very happy. This is simply a scene of father-son harmony. She and Shane have a very sweet relationship and what needs to be done has already been done. At this time, a voice came over the radio. Dale rushed to connect. T-Dog said they were in trouble, trapped in a department store with zombies everywhere outside. Knowing their situation, some people wanted to go out to rescue them, but Shane stopped them. He was also playing a leadership role here and wouldn't allow the rest of the group to risk their lives. But he was immediately contradicted by Amy, whose sister was also inside. Shane could only tell her that this was the end time and all they could do was save their own lives. Such a philosophy naturally, others will not understand. And Rick's side also does not know how long to walk, and the zombies have long treated them as the same kind. Glenn still can't believe that this method can work. No sooner had the words left their lips than a zombie set eyes on them, but it was only a matter of seconds. But unfortunately, the rain came anyway. If this continues, the camouflage will soon be washed away by the rain. The three upstairs could only silently pray that the rainstorm would stop soon. A few minutes later, the zombies around them seemed to smell something and started to riot. All staring at Rick and Glenn, one zombie pounced on them, and Rick struck him with an axe. They had to run quickly. The zombies behind them went berserk. They had to walk to clear a path and soon came to the yard where the truck was parked. They scrambled over the fence, but the gate won't last long. Rick stayed behind to shoot for cover while Glenn opened the key box and found the keys to the truck. They didn't dare stop for a moment and quickly started the vehicle. By this time, the fence could not withstand the zombies rushing in large numbers. They had no choice but to evacuate first. When the people upstairs saw them leave, they thought Rick had left them and prayed for them to return. The car drove in the direction of the city. The passenger side of Glenn was now close to tears because Rick just gave him a task, is to lure the group of zombies behind him. Then he can go downstairs to the roll-up door to save his companion. The way to distract the zombies is to make noise. Rick then broke the glass of a car, and the burglar alarm went off. Rick started the car, and Glenn took off in the sports car. He's in charge of attracting the zombies. Then he used the walkie-talkie to contact his companions and told them to hurry to the roll-up door and wait. Several people also no longer dawdle, quickly moving downstairs. Dixon panicked and yelled at everyone not to leave him behind. T-Dog is still a bit unforgiving and finally had to turn back to prepare to uncuff him, but the accident still happened. Dixon yelled at him directly for doing it on purpose. T-Dog said a sorry and then quickly left the place, leaving Dixon hysterical and yelling. T-Dog still has some guilt and locks the door to the roof so the zombies can't get up there. The others have made their way to the roll-up door and are ready to open it quickly as soon as the car arrives. Meanwhile, Glenn drove his sports car through the streets, and the zombies' attention was successfully attracted, afraid that they run too slow. This series of operations cannot miss half a point, or the end will be quite miserable. T-Dog also ran to the first floor. The zombies had also broken into the door, leaving them little time. At this time, Rick has driven to come directly to the warehouse to the door. T-Dog ran over and shouted to hurry up. The zombies were coming from behind. Rick also knocked on the door outside. Hearing the signal, several people quickly pulled the door open into the car, and Dixon, on the roof of the building, cannot break free from the handcuffs, loudly cursing T-Dog to hell. This time the truck also towards the city outside the drive. Rick took a look at the members of the back and did not find Dixon. T-Dog blamed himself for losing the key, and several people did not say anything in silence, and no one spoke for Dixon. Glenn, however, has completely let himself go. He has never driven a sports car before. Dixon, on the roof of the building, is getting increasingly panicked because the zombies have reached the door. If T-Dog hadn't locked the door, the zombies would have eaten him, but the damn handcuffs cannot be broken free. Finally, he saw the saw in the distance. He could only use the belt to hook it over. Whether he could escape or not could only be left to fate. The campsite had spotted the sports car, and the sirens kept going off. In the end, Shane pulled off a wire to stop it. Glenn told the crowd that everyone was alive and they were on their way. Just as he finished speaking, the van pulled in. The first thing they did was hug their loved ones. It was a trip back from the dead. Carl is thinking about his dad again as he watches the others reunite. Shane asked how they got out, and Glenn said a new guy helped us. Rick came out of the car, and Shane was shocked to see him. Rick was even more in disbelief. Lori and Carl also turned their heads, and there was Dad. Rick was so excited that he couldn't speak for a while. God bless. Carl cried and rushed up to him. Just like that, the family embraced. Everyone was exclaiming about the magic of fate. Only Shane felt a little embarrassed. When Rick looked at him, he also barely managed to squeeze out some smiles. In the evening, everyone sat around the fire. Rick talked about what happened during this time and expressed his gratitude to Shane. Then they also mentioned Dixon. Dixon had a brother, Daryl, who was out hunting. Rick took the blame on himself and would explain the situation to Daryl tomorrow. That night, Rick and Lori were finally reunited, which made him feel incredibly comfortable. But Shane sat on the car's roof and had difficulty sleeping. The next day, Rick woke up. He had not slept so well for a long time and came out to see that everyone was busy with their business. But at that moment, Carl's screams came from the woods. The crowd rushed in with weapons, and the good thing was that the child was fine. They came closer and saw that it was a zombie eating a deer. They also do not talk nonsense and immediately begin to whack the zombie until Dale cuts off his head, only to kill him completely. They need clarification about why the zombie will run here. It is difficult now the city has no food. At this time, there was another sound from the woods. They were immediately on guard, but a man with a crossbow came out. Daryl. He was swearing right out of the gate. The zombie had contaminated the deer he had worked so hard to hunt. Obviously, this man's character is very cranky. He proposed to cut open the place where the zombie bit the deer, and the rest should be edible, but the crowd present said they were reluctant to try it for fear of being infected with the zombie virus, because so far, they only know that the zombie bite will be infected. Who does not know if there are other ways of transmission? At this time, the zombie's head began to move again. Daryl had to send him to heaven and then taunted the crowd to kill zombies to destroy their heads. Do not know this? Rick looked at the guy in front of him, and there was no doubt that he was a real prick.
You got something you want to tell me?
Your brother was a danger to us all. So I handcuffed him on a roof, hooked him to a piece of metal.
This is Rick and Daryl's first encounter. Daryl was so angry when he found out they had left his brother behind that he couldn't stand it. He was just about to strike when Shane pounced him to the ground. Daryl's temper is very similar to his brother's. He is very violent and is about to take action with a knife. Rick is a police officer. After all, he is very good at it. Shane cooperated with him to subdue Daryl. Rick squatted down and tried to talk to him. Seeing that Daryl no longer resisted, Shane then let go of him. Rick explained to Daryl that the cuffing of Dixon was not a whim. He did not get along with the others. At this point, T-Dog intervenes, claiming that it wasn't Rick's fault but that he lost the key. He also told Daryl that he locked the rooftop door on his way out so the zombies couldn't catch him. Daryl was relieved, and he thought his brother was dead. He then asks where Dixon is, and he will rescue him. Rick said he would take him there. Lori was upset when she heard him say that. Even Shane thought he was stupid. Why fight for the lives of others? Rick said it was because of him too, and they couldn't leave Dixon alone. He would even be starved to death. Rick then turned his attention to Glenn, the meaning of which is self-evident. He liked this Asian boy. Glenn was willing to lead the way despite his apparent resistance. Finally, T-Dog also came forward and said he was willing to go. Rick also showed a leader's temperament at this time. Daryl's unruly personality is something that only Rick can conquer. The team leader is now Shane, who is now very opposed to Rick doing so. If the zombies at this time attack, what to do? Rick said that to protect the camp needs a lot of weapons. He tried to bring all the guns from the police station but lost them on the road. After they get the weapons can better protect the camp. Hearing this, Shane didn't say anything, but Lori started complaining again. Rick had just gotten out of danger, and now he had to go back to save someone that everyone was annoyed with. And she said she didn't want Rick to risk his life. Rick explained that he had met a man and a child, and if they hadn't taken him in, he would have been dead. Without their help, Rick would not have been able to reunite with his wife and son. The weapons bag also contains a walkie-talkie to communicate with him, and Rick must tell them not to go to Atlanta. Rick has too many reasons to go back, all due to responsibility. He then said goodbye to Carl Jr. In the eyes of his son, his father is bold and courageous, and perhaps this is an example of a father. They didn't dawdle and were soon on their way. Once they arrived in Atlanta, they parked the car by the railroad tracks, where they could easily retreat. The rest of the way was on foot. They soon arrived at the department store, where only one zombie existed. In order not to make noise, Daryl killed her directly with a crossbow. After a few minutes, they finally arrived at the top of the building. T-Dog broke the lock on the door, and Daryl was the first to rush in to check on his brother's condition. But when he got here, he was furious. There was only a saw and a severed hand on the ground. Daryl turned around and aimed his crossbow at T-Dog. Rick would not let him do that and took the pistol and pointed it at Daryl. Daryl then calmed down. He doesn't actually hate T-Dog. He's just venting his emotions, and he knows Dixon's character better than anyone else. Then he asked T-Dog for a square towel to put away the severed hand. He calmly analyzed the blood on the ground as too little. Dixon must want to stop the bleeding. They had to follow the blood trail and eventually came inside another door. Daryl called out as they walked, but there was no response. There were only a few zombie corpses along the way. He knew that his brother was strong and had no problem solving the zombies with one hand. Then Rick also found a branding iron on the table, with some skin tissue stuck to it, which is Dixon's means of stopping the bleeding. Finally, they found that the blood trail went all the way to the window. Dixon must have left through the staircase. If he goes outside, it's hard to survive with his injuries. They are reluctant to take a chance on thousands of zombies, but Daryl insists on going out on his own to find them. Rick stops him, and they start arguing again. Rick understands Daryl's feelings, but Dixon can't get far with these injuries. Rick advised Daryl to keep his head in the post-apocalyptic world. He should go to the neighborhood to look for it and evacuate if he can't find it. Perhaps Daryl was born to be Rick's right-hand man, and only Rick could calm him down. Until the afternoon, they did not find Dixon but risked getting the bag of guns back. They found that their car was gone when they arrived at the railroad tracks. Rick guesses that Dixon probably drove it away. Daryl felt bad, and he knew his brother's temper. He might have gone back to the camp to take revenge. During the time they were out, something also happened at the camp. Shane took Carl to play in the water as usual, just like he did with his son, but Lori very coldly called her son back. By the time her son was gone, Lori had told Shane in no uncertain terms that their relationship was over. Shane had nothing to say. It was so unfair to him. Since the end of the world, he has protected Lori and Carl but cannot do anything with this woman. and on the other side of the waterhole, for women helped the men wash their clothes. They talked and laughed, reminiscing about the good life before the world's end. Hearing their laughter, the man behind them came over. She is Carol's husband and a typical domestic violence man. He scolded Carol, "Focus on your laundry and cut the crap." Andrea, who was highly educated and naturally uncomfortable with the situation, approached the man and tried to reason with him, but the man didn't take it well. Instead, he used a lot of profanity and told her to mind her own business. It was his family's business. Then he ordered Carol to come with him, knowing that Carol would be beaten again if she went back with him. Andrea began to advise Carol that there was no need to be afraid of him. This angered the man, who slapped Carol in front of several people and then tried to take her away by force. As they argued, Shane came over, threw the man to the ground, and punched him hard. He took out his frustration with Lori on the man. He then warned him never to bully Carol again. Carol was on the sidelines, not learning her lesson, and couldn't bear to let her husband get beaten up like this. Shane left the place after taking his anger out, and Carol kept apologizing in front of her husband. In the evening, the man in the tent is considered to have recovered some, but he does not want to go out to dinner and even wants his daughter to stay with him. Carol took her daughter away on other excuses. If it weren't for her daughter, how could she have been willingly subjected to domestic violence? Then the crowd ate dinner at the camp, looking a bit cozy. Rick and the others were without a car and thought Dixon would retaliate against the camp, so they had to hurry back as fast as they could. Dixon did not appear, but the camp did have a crisis. The man was still sleeping in his tent when he suddenly heard what seemed to be some kind of movement outside and thought his wife was bothering him again. He was about to teach her a lesson when he realized it was a zombie. He was already stunned and was bitten to death right away. Andrea's sister Amy came to the car to look for something, just got out of the vehicle, and also encountered the zombie, directly bitten on her arm. Hearing her scream, the crowd immediately looked towards that side. The crowd panicked at once. Shane was the first to step forward and shoot the zombie. Not far away, Rick and 4 people heard the sound of gunfire, more vigorously towards the camp to rush. Due to Rick's departure, the camp had no more combat power. Zombies have bitten several people. Amy was also bitten. She watched her sister get bitten by a zombie. Watching her sister being bitten by the zombies, and looking at her painful appearance, Andrea did not know what to do to save her. Shane protects women and children. The entire camp had fallen by now, and most men had no experience fighting zombies. The men who could fight could only look after their own families. They retreated as they went. There were too many zombies. It was good that Rick and others finally arrived at this time. After a few minutes, they finished clearing the camp of zombies. Rick was relieved to see that his son was okay. This time the loss was so tragic that only about 10 people survived. Watching the death of former companions, several people are not very good in their hearts. Andrea's sister in her arms also lost her life. Remember to subscribe to my channel. I will continue to update. Rick and the others head to Atlanta in search of Dixon when zombies suddenly attack the survivor camp. The survivors were killed and injured, and only about 10 people survived. Amy also slowly lost her breath in Andrea's arms. Early the next morning, Daryl checks the zombies again and burns them all together. Andrea, however, kept her sister's body and just stared at her. The others came to persuade her to put it down. Amy's body had to be disposed of, but Andrea never responded. Rick would have liked to enlighten her himself, but to his surprise, Andrea took the gun and aimed it directly at his head. He also had something in his heart to blame Rick for. If they hadn't gone out, wouldn't this have happened? Rick had to leave too. The cleanup was still going on, and Daryl and the 2 of them were about to burn the bodies of their teammates. But Glenn stopped them. He believes the burns is the zombies, and their teammates should be buried. For the teammates who spent time together before, we all have feelings, and we will not say anything more. On the other hand, Jackie shouted up. She found Jim bleeding. The zombie must have bitten him. T-Dog grabbed him, and Daryl lifted his shirt to see that it was indeed the wound left by the zombie. There was a moment of silence. This was the last thing they wanted to see. Daryl suggests just letting him finish him off with a hoe. Dale also agreed with Daryl's suggestion. Rick objected, saying that Jim was not a zombie or a mad dog biting people. He was just a patient now. Rick has heard that the CDC is working on an antidote, so maybe going there will help. Shane disagreed, saying that the CDC had probably fallen too and that the place to go was Fort Benning, 100 miles away. It's a military base, heavily guarded, and everyone will be safe. Daryl didn't care that the two men were arguing. He grabbed a hoe and went to kill Jim. Rick calms him down again with his gun and tells him he can't kill anyone alive. Shane is also on Rick's side on this one. Finally, Andrea opens the scarf in her hand. It was the necklace she picked up at the department store. Today is her sister's birthday. The necklace has not yet been sent out. And then the yin and yang are separated. Not long after, Amy began to mutate. Andrea had to take out her weapon and send her off for the last time. She did not put her sister's death on Rick but hated herself for not being by her sister's side at that time. Carol also personally disposed of her husband's body. She cried while wielding a hoe as if all the aggression suffered over the years to let out. Now she can live well for herself and her daughter. Rick was very sad that this happened, but he thought he was not at fault. If he had not gotten the guns back, maybe everyone would not have been spared. After dealing with the camp, Shane called a meeting with everyone. He expressed his approval of Rick's proposal to go to the CDC. The next morning, Rick arrived early at the top of the mountain and tried to contact Morgan on his walkie-talkie. Although he didn't get a response, he left a message for Morgan to meet him at the CDC. Everyone was ready to start the migration, but this family chose to leave them. Rick did not object but instead took out a pistol and a few rounds of ammunition and gave it to them. The crowd has also said goodbye to them. In the post-apocalyptic world can only give each other their best wishes. Everyone also no longer dawdles. Rick left a message to Morgan here, and then the crowd began to set off. Jim, who the zombie bit, also stayed in the RV. An hour later, the RV hoses had problems, and the temperature was too high, so everyone had to stop and take a break. Jackie comes out of the car and tells the group that Jim is dying. Rick came to the car to check on him. Jim said that the bumps in the car were causing him pain, and he wanted everyone to leave him there. Rick didn't want to give up on him, but he chose to respect his wishes. They put him under a tree and he liked the environment better instead. Everyone said goodbye to him. After all, is born to die comrades. Rick wanted to leave him a gun, but he refused. Then the group continued to move towards the CDC and finally arrived at their destination in the evening. When they got out of the car, they realized that the place where they thought the army would be stationed had fallen. The place stank to high heaven, and there were corpses everywhere. When they arrived at the entrance, they found the doors locked. By this time, zombies were appearing behind them. Daryl's temper started to flare up, blaming Rick for bringing everyone to a dead end. The children in the crowd also began to sob. The adults also began to argue. Originally listening to Shane's advice to go to Fort Benning military base would be good. Now without supplies, it's hard to get through this evening. As they were evacuating, Rick noticed that the overhead camera was moving and someone was inside. In fact, the doctor inside was indeed watching them, but wasn't about to let them in. Shane is still trying to talk him down, telling him it's a fully automated camera. Rick knocked on the door and shouted, praying for the people inside to open the door, and at this time, the zombies around them began to move toward them. The doctor was also suffering inside, struggling to do the thought process. Just when the crowd was desperate and ready to leave, the door of the CDC opened. The crowd stopped dawdling and quickly entered the building. The hall of this CDC is relatively empty. There is no one. At that moment, a man with a weapon appeared across from them. The man asked if any of them had been infected. Rick could only answer truthfully that the one who was infected did not make it here. The man didn't say anything. He just took a good look at the group members. They have women, children, do not look like bad guys. Also put down the gun in their hands. Let them hurry to bring in the luggage. Once the door is closed, it cannot be opened. Now the crowd is back from the dead. Did not pay attention to the man, said the door cannot open things. Quickly took the luggage in, and then closed the door. Dr. Jenner then took them underground too. Rick looked at the empty hall and asked why there was no one else. Jenner replied that I was the only one left there. The crowd was in disbelief. They thought the government could develop the vaccine and protect them. Now they were disappointed. After everyone accepted this reality, the group had the best dinner since the end of the world. Jenner said that after the disaster, everyone here left. The situation got worse and worse. Military defenses were broken, and many people couldn't face the outside world. They had no choice and ended up committing suicide, leaving Jenner to keep working here. He tries to find a solution to the virus. After dinner, Jenner took them to their respective residences. It was a rare place to have a hot shower. Rick found Jenner alone, thanked him, and talked about the outside world. And his wife Lori is alone in the living room, flipping through books. Shane came here, looking at her stunning back. Drinking a bit of wine, Shane became bold. He wants to talk to Lori. He doesn't understand how Lori is so cold now, but Lori blamed Shane for lying to her about Rick's death. Shane was so aggravated that he kept explaining to Lori. When he went to the hospital to save Rick, the military was even slaughtering patients. He hid Rick, but at that time, Rick had no heartbeat, but somehow, he came back to life. If Rick had been alive in the hospital, Lori would not have left and probably have died at home. Shane said that he saved Lori and Carl and has been protecting them. Shane said and started to make a move on Lori. He wanted nothing more than to be with her. That's when Lori grabbed him hard around the neck, which sobered Shane up a bit, and he had to leave the room in anger. The next morning, while everyone was eating, Rick also noticed the wound on his good buddy's neck. Shane just explained that he accidentally got it while sleeping. After breakfast, the crowd still had a lot of questions. Jenner had to take them to the workplace to explain everything they wanted to know. Jenner said that after death, people would mutate into zombies. This time is as fast as 3 minutes, and the longest time is up to 8 hours. The only way to kill them is to destroy the brain. The crowd understood the principle but was more concerned about whether there was a solution. Jenner said helplessly that so far, there was no solution. At this point, the Wisedale looked at the countdown on the wall and asked what would happen after the time was up. Jenner said the generator would run out of fuel, said and left the place. Rick can only ask the AI what will happen when the power runs out. The answer they get is that the power will run out, and there will be full disinfection, although they did not understand what it meant. Rick took the people directly to where the fuel was stored, and indeed the fuel was almost gone. By this time, the lights in the entire hall had gone out. Jenner explained that the system would shut down unnecessary power if only half an hour were left. He also told the truth to everyone. If the power is exhausted and can only be here to die. Rick realized something was wrong and told his wife to pack up and prepare to leave. The crowd rushed to start moving. That's when the alarm in the hall sounds, indicating that the disinfection process has 30 minutes to go. Jenner flipped the switch, and the door was sealed. It was clear he was going to keep everyone here. Daryl goes berserk and tries to use violence to get Jenner to open the door but is stopped by T-Dog. Rick came over and calmly asked him to open the door, but Jenner said that the door above had been blocked, and the one here was also closed, and there was nothing he could do about it. It was all computer controlled. Rick asked again what would happen here after 28 minutes. Jenner said that what is stored here is quite dangerous. All kinds of viruses have everything. If power is exhausted here, a self-destruct sequence will be initiated. The crowd fell silent, which meant everyone there would die. Jenner then went on to say that this place will release a bomb second only to nuclear bombs, igniting the air and destroying the existence of all organisms with no pain at all, which is also a good choice. The women and children were already crying in fear. Only a few men refused to admit defeat and slashed the iron door with axes, but it was all to no avail. The door could withstand a rocket blast. Shane has gone crazy and forced him to open the door with his gun. Rick stops him. Violence is not going to solve anything now. Lori also begs Jenner to open the door. No one wants to die. Rick and the others convinced Jenner that he could open the door here, but he couldn't open the door outside either. Then he entered the password, and the door finally opened. With only 4 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock, everyone ran desperately for the outside. Surprisingly, Jackie chose to stay. She didn't want to become a zombie. She was happy to die without pain. It was her choice. The crowd also no longer forced. Even Andrea also chose to stay. Amy died, and she had no confidence in life. Dale stayed and tried to persuade her. Several people who came outside had to choose to break the glass, but no matter how hard they tried, there was no response and even the shot only left a little trace. At this time, Carol rushed up. She took up the grenade that Rick had gotten in the tank. I never thought it would come in handy here. A huge explosion finally broke the glass. Now every minute is precious. They soon arrived at the car. The crowd was just about to leave, but they didn't expect Dale to persuade Andrea to come out. They also quickly ran toward the car. There were only 10 seconds left. It was too late to start the car. Lori hurriedly shouted for them to get down. Rick also let the people inside the car quickly find cover. A few seconds later, a huge explosion was heard, and the CDC seemed to turn into a volcano. The good thing is that the area affected is a manageable size. After the explosion stopped, the people were not affected much, and they all survived. Now everyone had to head towards Fort Benning. As Shane said, if you were in such a post-apocalyptic world, how would you choose?